Okay, good afternoon. We're going to start today's program, to which I am very glad to welcome you, focusing K-12 education reform on teaching efforts. I'm Joseph Kearney, Dean of Marquette University Law School. We are very grateful that you are with us today. The Law School's Lubar Center for Public Policy Research and Civic Education has worked together with the Marquette University College of Education to prepare this program. So in expressing my gratitude to you, I speak for, among others, my Marquette colleague, Heidi Bostic, who serves as the Dean of the College of Education, as well as the Dean of the Klingler College of Arts and Sciences. We do not, though, give her 2 votes in Dean's Council. Not that we vote on terribly much in Dean's Council, but let's leave that aside. The Law School's Lubar Center and the College of Education have teamed up for a number of programs over the years. Today's program, as often, grows out of work by my colleague, Alan Borsick, our Senior Fellow in Law and Public Policy and longtime journalist with a particular portfolio for reporting on K-12 education. Registrants for today's conference received a link to Alan's essay in last fall's Marquette Lawyer, Are There Any Solutions to the Problems? Along with the essay, we included in the magazine 6 one-page reactions, one of which was titled, Successful Reform Requires Improving Teachers' Classroom Practice. As I make that statement, I realize that we actually gave Professor Bob Lowe 2 pages in the magazine, but in any event, we included 6 reactions. That particular reaction, the one that I just noted, not Professor Lowe's, Successful Reform Requires Improving Teachers' Classroom Practice, was by Robert Pondiscio, who is the Senior Fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. In his brief opportunity in the magazine, Mr. Pondiscio asked, what if instead of exclusively pulling policy levers, we directed the reform movement's energy and enthusiasm toward improving classroom practice? Toward the end of his column, Mr. Pondiscio posited as follows. Sustainable improvement in education requires a focus on the practical, everyday realities of teaching and learning, coupled with policies that support and enhance these practices rather than simply mandate them. While Marquette University itself takes no particular position on the best way to improve K-12 education, we share the universal interest in improved student outcomes, and we decided further to explore Mr. Pondiscio's thesis in this program. Here's how we're going to proceed this afternoon. Mr. Pondiscio is going to speak from this podium briefly, probably not much more than 5 minutes, in order to frame his central point. Then Alan Borsick will engage him in conversation for a half hour or so. That will conclude by 1:15 p.m., and it will be followed immediately by a conversation between Alan and another guest, Sarah Almy, Chief of External Affairs at the National Center on Teacher Quality and former Executive Director of Teacher and Leader Learning at Denver Public Schools. That should go to 1:45 p.m. when we will take a break. Please be aware that during that break, we need to make a logistical move here up front in order to set up the conference's panel discussion, which will begin at 2 p.m. That panel will be moderated by Professor Cynthia Ellwood of Marquette College of Education, and Alan will introduce her and the other panelists then. We work very hard to keep our programs running on time, and we ask you to help, not least by being back, ready to go at 2 p.m. A final note or two, both logistical and substantive. involving our interest in your questions. On account of time, we are not able to provide for questions directly from the floor. Rather, you should have received a note card when you arrived, and you are welcome to write down questions and give them to my colleague, Hillary DeBlois, Program Manager for the Lubar Center, who's standing toward the back. At Hillary's urging, we even went with the 4x6 index card as opposed to the 3x5 one. You can get them to her either during the brief break at 1:45 p.m. or by passing them over to your left, as it would be during the 2 p.m. panel. We will do two things with the note cards and the questions. If there is a particular prevailing theme, we will ask Mr. Pondiscio and Ms. Almy to speak to it during their brief opportunity for responsive comments at 2:45 p.m., immediately following the panel discussion. The program concludes at 3 p.m. More generally, we will go through these notes carefully after the program and use them to inform future programming that we might do here together between the Lubar Center and the College of Education. We regard as an important topic not only K-12 education reform efforts generally, but also this particular aspect. This will be my only appearance at the podium, and in fact, Dean Bostic and I are due across campus in a meeting that begins at 3:05 p.m., so I will not be here to say thank you to our guests or to any of you, but please know that we are very grateful for your being with us today, and we hope in the future. And please join me in welcoming Robert Pondiscio.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm deeply honored to be here at the Marquette University Law School and the Lubar Center for Public Policy Research and Civic Education. You're here for the lunch, right? Okay, I just wanted to be clear. More earnestly, it is humbling and gratifying to see a piece that I wrote for Marquette Today spark an entire academic convening at a place as distinguished as Marquette. So a heartfelt thank you to Alan Borsuk for his leadership, for pulling this event together. Alan, I'm grateful for your vision and commitment to these critical conversations. I will confess that I am somewhat surprised that the argument that I've made about education reform is in any way provocative or anything but obvious. Improving student outcomes depends on improving what happens inside classrooms, where teachers and students meet every day. Yet for decades, reform efforts have rested, at least tacitly, on the assumption that schools and teachers already know what to do and only need to be held accountable for doing it. But those of us who have been classroom teachers, how many of us have been classroom teachers? Okay, excellent. Good focus group. For those of us who have been classroom teachers, this widely accepted theory of change overlooks a critical truth. Teachers often lack the training, support, and evidence-based tools, most specifically curriculum, to deliver effective instruction. So with respect to my higher ed colleagues, too often our schools of education don't see it as their role to, quote, train teachers, leaving new educators unprepared for classroom realities. As Doug Lemov, the author of Teach Like a Champion, once wrote, quote, many of the tools likely to yield the strongest classroom results remain beneath the notice of our theories and theorists of education. If you've listened to in recent years, the Sold a Story podcast on public radio, they exposed how gurus and publishers compounded this disservice done to teachers, misleading generations of us about literacy instruction by promoting ineffective practices like balanced literacy, while eliding what research tells us about the science of reading and effective instruction. This was not a teacher failure. It was a systemic failure to train educators in what works. Structural reforms, standardized testing, charter schools, accountability systems, funding formulas, and the like, have their place. I support these things. They set conditions for progress, but they're not enough. The heart of education is teaching and learning, and no policy succeeds if it doesn't improve classroom practice. Look at Mississippi. Look at Louisiana, which in recent years have posted historic gains in reading and math by focusing on classroom practice, investing in teacher training, and prioritizing evidence-based curricula. I've said it for years. I'll say it again this morning or this afternoon. We've made teaching too hard for mere mortals. Teachers are expected to juggle lesson planning from scratch, grading, data analysis, parent communication, bureaucratic hurdles, often without adequate support. Increasingly, we are asking schools to be something like social services agencies and teachers to act as something like unlicensed therapists. No wonder burnout and shortages persist. Recently, I launched a Substack newsletter. Yes, I know, I'm about the 2 millionth person to launch a Substack. I've titled it The Next 30 Years. Why? Well, the last 3 decades have been dominated by these structural reform efforts that have frankly overpromised and underdelivered. The next 30 years should prioritize classroom practice, high-quality curricula, streamlined workloads, and professional development rooted in evidence. And most importantly, a clear-eyed view of teaching so that the job can be done effectively and well by the teachers we have, not the teachers we wish we had. For years, we've talked about teacher quality as the biggest in-school factor in student success. We should instead be talking about quality teaching, not who the teacher is, but what that teacher does. Yet we continue to chase silver bullets, new policies, new programs, instead of helping the teachers we have be better at their jobs. So let's keep pushing for smart policies, but yes, let's please also focus on the classroom. Let's make teaching a job people can do well and sustainably every day. Thank you. I look forward to the conversation today. Okay. Oh, there's water there.
Am I on?
Yes.
Microphone wise? Okay, good.
They're all so quiet.
Well, they were good students before they were teachers.
Okay.
I feel like I've got, a big group of my friends here because I know many of you, and this is a really an important and distinguished group in the audience and up front here. So we made teaching too tough a job. Curriculum is one area where it could be dealt with. But a lot of these other things, teachers became social workers and nurses and therapists for all sorts of things because that's where the kids were. They were in front of the teachers. How do you lighten the total burden on teachers?
I'll clarify my comment. When I say that teachers have become something like unlicensed therapists, we're seeing the rise of SEL, social and emotional learning, which, let's be clear, this is not new. We just changed the name. So 20 years ago, we called it teaching the whole child when I was teaching at PS 277 in the South Bronx. And by the way, I should have mentioned a little bit of my background. I had a whole other career in the media world. I was a mid-career alternative certification teacher. I went from the magazine industry to teaching at PS 277 in the South Bronx starting about 2002, which for context, the South Bronx is District 7 in New York City. That's the lowest scoring district in New York City. My school was the lowest scoring school in that district. So it was quite a jarring transition. So a lot of my views about education policy and practice are I don't say unique to that context, but informed by that context. So back to SEL, or teaching the whole child. What troubles me about this is the expectation. Alan, you're exactly right. We don't need to tell teachers to be empathetic. They are empathetic. If they didn't like to be around children on career day, they probably would have signed up, at the table that said like lighthouse keeper or accountant. Not elementary school teacher. But by elevating that to something that's a co-equal goal of academics, you get a situation like one I saw, and this has stuck with me for 20 years, when I was teaching in the South Bronx. A teacher colleague, lovely, earnest young lady, I remember saying to me one day, it's like, well, reading and math, those things are important, but I teach the whole child. And if you parse that statement, she was almost giving herself permission to not be good at teaching reading and math. Why? Because I'm empathetic, I care about my kids, I'm concerned with their social and emotional growth. She didn't use the language of SEL, but that was clearly the point. She could go home feeling good about herself, despite the fact that fewer than 1 out of 6 of our kids could read or do math on grade level. So that's my concern with things like asking, and I don't mean to be glib when I call it unlicensed therapy, but increasingly we are asking teachers to play this quasi-therapeutical role that is more akin to social work or the clergy than classroom teaching. And not that there's anything wrong with that, but why would you ask, and I want to be clear on this, I'm not suggesting either that the mental health crisis that we're seeing in schools right now is anything other than real. It is. But we have this longstanding habit, policymakers, of asking, frankly, the least functional institution in urban life, the local public school, to do more and more. So if we expect, and I think you and I agree on this, if we're expecting to make a big difference in academic outcomes, we have to ask those schools to do less. You know, the needs are real, but why are we asking schools and classroom teachers to take on this burden when they're already failing at their primary responsibility?
Which of course would lead into saying, well, who's going to pick up the load on that, on mental health, on simple health needs, whatever, at a time when government services are nationwide not facing such a pretty picture?
Yeah, I don't know what the answer is, but I know what the answer is not. It's not asking Ms. Jones to do it.
You taught at this very low-performing school in the Bronx. You subsequently wrote a book, I have a copy of it sitting on the table over here, about the success academies in New York City, some of them in the same neighborhood where you taught.
Yeah.
Which are known exactly for that, success.
Yes.
What's the difference between those two schools?
Ooh, how much time do we have?
I think we're here for supper.
Because it was, it's you know, I say this all the time. Every story or every conversation about education worth having either very quickly gets to saying, well, it's complicated, or it's not a very good conversation, and this is a complicated one. So the conceit of the book that Alan is referring to, about 5 or 10 years ago, I went back to the South Bronx to teach, or not to teach, to embed at an elementary school literally across the street from where I'd been a student teacher and 4 or 5 blocks from where I'd been a 5th grade teacher. These schools are called Success Academies. There's about 50 of them in New York City. They're run by this very energetic reformer by the name of Eva Moskowitz, who's a very polarizing figure. And where my school was was the lowest performing in the lowest performing district, the school that I embedded with for a year was one of the top 5 elementary schools in the state of New York. Same neighborhood, which hadn't changed, you know, appreciably demographically since I'd been a teacher there. I walked into that school expecting to write a book about curriculum and instruction, because that's what I usually write about. I ended up writing, almost by accident, a book about school culture, because I think that's what the difference is. But when I say it's complicated, we've told a very uncomplicated story for years about why schools like that work. And it's a very comforting, to us reformers, story to tell. Oh, look, it's because by the way, in New York City, charter schools are co-located. You know, there are literally charter schools in the same buildings with public schools. So we love to say, the only difference is the door the kid walks in. They walk in this door, they get a bad outcome. They walk in the Success Academy door, they get a good outcome. See, it's the teacher, et cetera. Well, it's a lot more complicated than that. And I'll give you one clear example. Oversubscribed charter schools in New York City, like everywhere, admit by lottery. So they have a lottery for Success Academy, and I'm not sure what the numbers are most recently. The lottery's in April, but when I was reporting the book, it was 6 for 1, 6 applicants for every 1 seat. So that's another proof point. Like, this proves we're getting it done with the kids. We have no control over our student population. Well, after the lottery, they have a welcome meeting, which I describe it as scared straight. They are very emphatic about what they stand for and what they will not stand for, and it does, in fact, scare a lot of parents away. They're very rigid. They describe themselves as Catholic school on the outside, Bank Street on the inside. Some number fall away. Then there's a confirm your interest email. Then there's paperwork that you have to fill out. Then you come to a rehearsal, a uniform fitting. They keep asking parents to show up and show up and show up and show up. And the result is by the time, and I demonstrated this in the book, by the time school starts in August, it's your chance of getting in are not really 1 in 6, but 1 in 2. But more to the point, this kind of culture edification, if you like, they get a group of parents who are either desperate or actively buying what Eva Moskowitz and Success Academy is selling. Rigor, academics, no-nonsense culture. They will literally send you home if your socks are the wrong color, on and on and on. Now, let me be clear about this. This is not to say, because one of the criticisms of the book was, oh, you're saying it's just parent self-selection. No, I'm not saying that at all. But I'm saying it's amazing what you can get done when you are starting with every adult in a child's life pulling in the same direction, buying what they're selling, as it were. So, I mean, I don't want to paint the picture that Success Academy is doing anything less than stellar work, and the best example of this is that they are getting better results with this self-selected group of parents and students than the New York City gifted and talented schools are getting with kids who are literally handpicked. So it does show what you can accomplish when you have a clear vision of who you are and you attract adherence. But the other thing, the last complication, is clearly the demands that they make on parents are such that it's almost impossible for a single mom, as it were, who cannot read with their child every night, fill out the homework logs, meet these prodigious demands they put on parents. It's really hard for single parents to do. So as a result, this is not data, Alan, this is just a journalistic observation. You just see a disproportionate number of two-parent families in this otherwise impoverished neighborhood. That makes a difference too. So you tell me, is it, what's the lesson you draw from that?
Next question. Well, I hear this from teachers. I hear it when I write a column and I get email from I don't know who. You're never going to succeed because of the lives the kids lead, the home lives, the instability in their lives. In this room, but 7 or 8 years ago now, Matt Desmond kicked off his book on evictions, and his mantra was, without stable shelter, everything else falls apart. Can schools succeed dealing with the kids who are out there? And one other thought, you spoke last week at the American Enterprise Institute. Krista DeBoer, who's sitting right in front of me, was also on that program, the Center for Urban Teaching based in Milwaukee. One of the things you said is we have to have programs that succeed not just with the kids who are really good candidates for succeeding, but all those other kids. Well,
this is why I come back to raising the level of not teacher quality, but quality teaching, making this a job doable by the teachers we have, not the teachers we wish we had, because it's just inevitable, right? Just do the math. We have, I think, something like 3.7 million full-time teachers in this country. Any number that large means that by definition, the men and women who will do that job will not be saints and superstars. They will not be, you're not going to lure them away from medicine or law or engineering, because if you took those professions combined, they don't reach that number. So when are we going to be honest about the fact that the teachers we have are the teachers we have and make the job doable by those people? You can't raise pay sufficiently to make this an attractive proposition for the teachers you wish you had. I'm not sure if that's an answer to your question or not, but I think it's a way to begin thinking about who are the teachers, what are the demands we're making on them, how do we reconcile those two things?
Which leads into the curriculum and the materials. How do you?
Well,
how are we doing on making these things more of a reality?
Okay, here, Alan, is why when I signed up to be a teacher, I was not planning on being at the Marquette Law School 25 years later. I was planning on spending 2 years as a mid-career public service do-gooder stint and then going back to the media business, which did me the favor of immolating while I was away. So there wasn't one to go back to, as no one knows better than you. Right. So when I became a new teacher, and it's important to recapture that mindset because I was teaching 5th grade and I hadn't been in an elementary school since I was an elementary school student, and I was almost 40 years old. So a lot had changed. And there was a certain willing suspension of disbelief. In other words, what I was being told was best practice with my kids did not resemble in any way, shape, or form what I remembered from elementary school. But I was, again, willing to kind of go along. And one of, there are many manifestations of that, but the most important one for my career was on curriculum. I remember asking my staff developer from Teachers College, where's my curriculum? What am I supposed to teach? And she said to me, well, Mr. Pondiscio, you're the best person to know what every child needs. And as God is my witness, Alan, I thought she was making fun of me. Because like, okay, yeah, I get it. I just came from the magazine business. Yeah, okay, hazing ritual, sure. Hey, where's my curriculum? For reasons I later came to understand, this is a theory of what works. If you've listened to those Soul to Story podcasts that I alluded to, then you're probably familiar with this. There's this idea that reading comprehension is not just a skill, but a transferable skill, and that if you want to create good, strong readers, the key is to just get them to love reading. Put just the right book in their hands. Get them engaged by stories that reflect their interests and backgrounds. And I became, over time, a disciple of a gentleman by the name of E.D. Hirsch Jr. of Core Knowledge fame. I was just telling one of our fellow panelists that when I used to bring up his name in my ed school classes, invariably somebody would say some version of, oh, that's that dead white guy stuff. Nobody takes that seriously. I'm like, wait a minute, that's not what his stuff is about at all. It's about background knowledge, it's about vocabulary. I've said this 1,000 times. When I read Hirsch's books, it was as if he'd been standing in my classroom. Like he was the one theorist who could diagnose what I was seeing every day. Children who could decode, read the words, but could not answer comprehension questions about it. The Lucy Calkins of the world, my staff developers would say, well, that's because it's not engaging to them, it's not interesting to them, we have to make the curriculum reflect their interests. Hirsch would say, no, it's background knowledge. That the way language works is literate speakers and writers make assumptions about what their listeners and readers know, and when those assumptions are correct, language, which exists as a kind of a shorthand, is fluid, and when not, then comprehension breaks down. So his work has guided my work ever since. It's better now than it was 20 years ago. We're having a kind of a science of reading movement in this country now that we can talk about. But that's why I became a curriculum advocate, because one, I didn't have any, and by the way, what happens when you don't have a curriculum? Well, then you spend 10, 20, 30 hours a week on Teachers Pay Teacher, which didn't even exist back then. It was Google and Pinterest. Creating lesson plans from scratch to figure out just the thing that's gonna engage your kids. Fine in theory, except those 10 or 20 or 30 hours are hours that I'm now not spending giving feedback to student work, developing relationships with my students, studying their work, learning the material myself so I can more effectively communicate it. In other words, the burdens we place on teachers are just not their maximum leverage. Somebody else can write the curriculum. Nobody else can give feedback, get to know the kids, et cetera. So that one basic shift alone would probably make a big difference. And I've been accused of wanting to turn, teachers or turn schools into, mixed schools or Walmart schools. And I always say, no, I don't. But let's not pretend it wouldn't be an improvement. In other words, if there were more predictability, at least at the elementary school level, about the curriculum, we could probably get more kids to the starting line of basic literacy and numeracy just by more efficient use of teacher time.
Fairly often, though, teachers will tell me one curriculum doesn't fit all. You need something that responds to different kids and different styles of learning. How much can you really lean on a curriculum?
If anybody says learning styles, I'm walking out. There's no such thing
I
as
take it
learning
back. I never
styles.
said that.
But this is another good example, right? Like, that we don't get more sophisticated. We still indulge in neuromyths, like learning styles, right brain, left brain, all these things. A more sophisticated field. This would be like your doctor talking about bloodletting or phrenology. Like this, we don't talk about this stuff anymore. It's been proven it doesn't exist. I don't mean to pick on you, Alan.
Everybody does.
No, because I take it in the spirit in which it's intended. Look, it's a fair criticism, but this is about making teaching easier and doable. And for pity's sake, language. I don't set out to say and write controversial things, but if I ever did want to get myself canceled, I would write a piece called, using saltier language than I'm about to, language doesn't give a damn what you think. In other words, back to Hirsch, his insight, what you learn from reading guys like Hirsch is that language is like a river that kind of carves its own banks. You cannot, our earnest efforts to do things like culturally responsive pedagogy make an assumption that we are going to teach kids in the modes and language and with interests that they have, as opposed to what the broader world assumes they need to know. But again, to make this point, the language that we use, standard discourse, it just rests on a broad body of background knowledge. And it is, whether you like it or not, it's Eurocentric, if you like. In other words, if somebody makes a reference to Pandora's box or Achilles' heel, I don't need to explain what those things are. If kids don't learn that, then they're going to fall behind. So I should cut to the chase. Let me use an analogy rather than try to do E.D. Hirsch 101. Think of every utterance, everything you read, like even the test passages on a standardized test. I always like to say it's like a child's game of Jenga, if you've ever played that game, where every individual block is a bit of background knowledge, a vocabulary word, or something like that. And then if you play that game, you know what happens. You can pull out a couple of blocks, then you pull out one too many, and the entire thing collapses. It is the hardest thing in the world for educated, literate people to understand how we are just awash, like the proverbial fish that doesn't know it's in water. We don't realize how much tacit, taken for granted background knowledge and vocabulary we possess that allows us to have conversations like this, that allow us to read with comprehension. If we do not teach our most disadvantaged students, give them that same array of mental furniture that we just take for granted, they will never catch up in reading. There's this thing called the Matthew effect. It's based on Keith Stanovich from the University of Toronto coined the phrase, I believe. And it's based on that the Bible, the parable from Matthew. I can't quote it, but it's the one about the rich get richer, the poor get poorer. The nature of language proficiency is if you come to school the first day with a decent vocabulary and a decent amount of background knowledge, your mind is Velcro. You're ready to get more vocabulary, more background knowledge. If you are a disadvantaged kid who comes from a language-poor home, if you're an English language learner, you don't have what better off kids have. You don't have that. Your Velcro is not as sticky. So if we don't close that knowledge and vocabulary gap from day one, the Matthew effect, the language and knowledge rich get richer, the knowledge and language poor get poorer. And that's we have not faced that. And that has ramifications, obviously, for teachers. So that advice that staff developer gave me, Mr. Pondiscio, you're the best person to know what every child needs. I am not. 30 years into this, I'm still not. We need to look at what do literate speakers and writers assume their audiences know and teach that.
You have a good vantage point on the national scene as far as what's ever become of school reform, advocacy, and such. How's it going?
You're getting me in a very blunt mood, so I will.
Oh, good.
I will say it's been a failure. It's been a failure. There are bright spots. Urban charter schools, you'd much rather be a low-income kid of color in a place like New York or Boston or Washington today than 30 or 40 years ago. But one of the reasons I kind of bang on this drum about we need to change practice, not policy, is exactly because of that. The assumptions we've made, hey teacher, hey school, you know what to do, we're just going to hold you accountable. If those were true, then we would have seen, if results were going to come from that playbook, we would have seen them by now, and we haven't. Even accounting for COVID and the learning losses in COVID, 17-year-old NAEP, you know what that is, right? The National Assessment of Educational Progress, the so-called Nation's Report Card. it looks like a dead man's EKG. It hasn't budged in 30 years. You see some bright spots here and there. You see some gains in fourth grade reading and math that plateau and then go down. But if that basic theory of change, accountability, testing, standards, accountability, if that was going to bear fruit, it would have borne fruit by now.
That was what motivated the piece that I wrote for the Marquette Law School magazine, was this sense that all these things going back, and especially No Child Left Behind is the Exhibit A, which goes back to 2002, all the gaps, all the problems are the same as they were then.
Yeah.
In the case of Milwaukee, reading scores have not budged, and they're not really better in a notable way with the private schools in the voucher program or the charter schools.
Yeah.
How confident are you that they could be budged?
Well, I think they, this is confirmation bias on my part, but I think they could be budged if we had a clear-eyed view of what it takes. So let's take fourth grade reading. There have been fourth grade reading scores and then they plateau, right, or they decline. Accountability hawks look at that and say, we took our foot off the gas. We were doing great up until fourth grade, then we took our foot off the gas. I would say no. The language complexity and demands of reading comprehension simply get harder. So what happens after that? The tests don't reveal anything about weak teaching. They reveal stuff about language complexity that we are not reckoning. And this gets complicated too. But by the way, sorry, I'm going to bang on the curriculum drum again. This is an argument for, and I don't want to say standardizing curriculum, but at least adding some predictability to what kids learn when they learn it, and having testing reflect that. This is a completely different issue, but it's germane. Reading tests make faulty assumptions about what reading is. Those of you who've been a teacher back me up on this. The feedback you get from standardized state tests is, oh, this kid needs help inferencing, comparing and contrasting. In other words, they're predicated in this idea that reading comprehension is a skill like throwing a ball or riding a bike. In other words, not just a skill, but a transferable skill. Once you learn how to ride a bike, you can ride any bike because we've taught you how to ride a bike. Same thing with reading, right? Once you learn how to read, you can read anything. It doesn't matter if it's a newspaper, a memo, an email from your boss, etc. Reading is reading is reading. Not so. Reading is what a cognitive scientist would call domain specific. You have to know a little bit about the topic and sometimes a lot about the topic to make sense of it. If you don't believe this, go home and read a college-level textbook on a subject that you've never read before, or go read the operating instructions, for reinstalling the operating system on your computer. You will feel what it's like to be a fourth grader who's a struggling reader. You may do things like your finger will you'll do this on the page. You might even feel your lips moving. Like you didn't become a bad reader, you're just reading out of your domain. So if we know this is true about reading, well then what's the answer? Give kids the broadest possible amount of domain knowledge across the curriculum. This is Hirsch's essential insight. But then you also have to back that up with standardized testing that rewards that. If you have reading tests that treat reading incorrectly as a transferable skill, well then you're going to do what as a teacher? Teach reading as a transferable skill. I'm not here to teach science, art, music, etc. I'm here to teach reading comprehension. It's not a transferable skill. So this is where there is work for policy folks, by the way, is you have to, education policy has to reward the classroom conditions that we seek and not be a blind alley for teachers. I alluded to the Sold a Story podcast. I'm a big fan of Emily Hanford's work. And there's a lesson in her work for those of us who consider ourselves to be education reformers. So for years, right, Alan, what do we do? We beat teachers up. Look at these terrible teachers, they're lazy. I don't mean that you necessarily did, but a lot of us in the education reform, just fire bad teachers and all will be well. Emily Hanford Sold a Story. She comes along and she correctly, in my view, paints teachers not as sinners, but as sinned against. You've been given bad training. You've been sold a story about how reading works, and it's not so. I know Emily, and I've heard her describe teachers coming to her with tears in their eyes. Like, I didn't know. You know, this idea that when you do better, when you know better, you do better. Well, let's take a cue from that. The teachers are not the bad guys here. Are there some teachers who shouldn't be in classrooms? Of course. 3.7 million. You're going to have some folks who like, here's the keys to the classroom. Whatever you want, do it. It's great. And you're going to have some that maybe should be lighthouse keepers and accountants. But in the main, the big takeaway of things like Sold to Story should be, when teachers know what to do, they're not that bad. We just need to make sure that they know what to do, and we can't, as policymakers, assume that's already in place.
We'll have to be brief here, but you've had a big interest lately in Houston. What's going on there?
Yeah, so I spent a lot of time in Houston in the last year or two. It's a little bit of Back to the Future, where 20 years ago you had figures like Michelle Rhee in Washington and Joel Klein in New York City, where I became a teacher. These kind of high-profile education reformers who took over big cities, and they were media darlings. Michelle Rhee on the cover of Time holding a broom, which was symbolizing she was going to sweep away bad teachers. And we kind of overplayed our hands, and what started as kind of an earnest do-gooder movement, that had a lot of popularity, media popularity, movies like Waiting for Superman, We Were the Heroes, kind of became this kind of technocratic, not very pleasant movement that narrowed curriculum, pushed testing, and lost its popularity. So fast forward 20 years. There's this guy named Mike Miles, who's the state has taken over Houston. Mike Miles has been put in place to reform the Houston School District. And it's just striking to me, well, two things. One, I actually think his reforms are pretty good. Again, confirmation bias, but he's really making the job of teacher, of the Houston teacher, doable by the teachers they have. They have this system called NES, New Education System. It has a set curriculum. They routinize their lessons. I've got to come up with a better word than routinize because it makes it sound really dull and tedious. It's content rich. They teach the lesson, they do a check for understanding, and then they literally physically differentiate the kids. The kids who master the lesson, you're going to the library. The kids who need more time, you're staying here. So differentiation is a largely, what's the phrase from Hamlet? It's a custom more honored in the breach than the observance. Now you can't avoid it in Houston. So it's effective. 2 years in, it seems like it's putting up good results. But let me not bury the lead. People hate it. I mean, just hate it. It's as if Houston was in great shape and this guy came along and broke it. It was weak even by the standards of other urban centers. And the takeaway there, depressing takeaway, is I think we've just lost our appetite for this work. Where it's almost as if we feel like
everybody?
in the case of Houston, the media, parents, other politicians. This guy is where figures like that used to be heroes. Now on day one, he was being vilified. So I'm concerned that we have just lost maybe we just don't think we can do this anymore.
On both the right and left?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, if you think about it, and again, I'm getting out of looking at this through policy and politics and just looking at practice. But what's going on politically in this country right now? Folks on the left have rekindled their romance with teachers' unions and public schools. Folks on the right are now more interested in ESAs, school choice, et cetera. Neither right nor left seems to be investing a lot of energy in traditional public schools. And to be clear, I'm a unabashed choice guy, but I'm also, having been a former urban public school teacher, you alluded to the comments I gave at AEI last week. I keep cautioning my choice friends, the public school system is not going to go away. To me, that raises the bar on things like I'm talking about. I don't want to see schools like the one that I used to teach at become what they almost certainly would become in a choice-driven system, which is schools for non-choosers, schools of last resort, warehousing kids and making no attempt to teach them whatsoever. So the time is now to really to make teaching a job doable by the teachers we have, because those teachers are sure as heck going to be in schools like the ones where I used to teach.
Or to quote you, I believe, changing the roof over the kids doesn't change what's going on under the roof.
Well, yeah, you can't change who the teacher works for only and think you're going to get a better result. I mean, well, you can if your theory of change is that, oh, there's all this dynamism and excellence out there, and the thing that's holding us back is bureaucracy and union domination. Back me up, those of you who have been teachers. I don't see any reason to believe that there's all this excellence and energy and dynamism and know-how waiting to get freed from the shackles of the public education system. I know I don't sound like a choice guy when I say that. I'm a choice guy. But even folks who believe in choice have to, I think, concern themselves with the quality of curriculum, the quality of instruction.
So the next 30 years, your blog,
Yes.
your Substack, what's number one on the agenda?
Well, I mean, I default to curriculum not just because I'm a, Kool-Aid swilling acolyte of E.D. Hirsch Jr., although I am, but because I think it's the most obvious lever. When I think of how teachers spend their time and how teachers ought to spend their time, I alluded to this before, only the teacher can be there in the classroom to get to know the kid. Only the teacher can be there to give feedback, to respond in the moment. Something's got to come off the teacher's plate, and the most obvious thing to me is curriculum. Does this mean that I want to, have standardized, scripted curriculum everywhere? No, even though it would be effective, I don't want to do that. But it's just the most obvious thing that we can do to free up teacher capacity so they can spend their time doing more fruitful things.
We have actually filled up our time here, which I could carry on with this conversation and the others. In fact, I had the privilege of spending about 45 minutes with Sarah Almy and Robert Pondiscio in the cafe here early this morning. I could keep going the rest of the day, but I'm going to say thank you.
Thank you.
You will be back at the end of the program.
Not going anywhere.
But this is, you may think what you're saying isn't controversial or provocative. I find it very provocative and important. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.
I'm going to call up Sarah. Thank you. We'll make a quick transition here.
Oh, thank you.
I think it was in 2011, we had a conference somewhat like this here in this room. And at that time, I got in touch with an organization called the Education Trust, looking for someone to take part. The subject was not that dissimilar from here, how to close gaps and get more kids moving forward. And Sarah Almy was working there, and she came in and she did a really, really good job at that conference. So when I came across her name recently while looking around for thoughts on who to speak here, I was pleased to see that she is now working for the National Council on Teacher Quality, and to invite her back. To give you 4 slices of her background, she worked for the New Teacher Project, now known as TNTP. She worked for the Education Trust. She moved to Denver then and was deeply involved in Denver school issues, which Denver was a national pioneer on teaching issues. And now she's with the National Council on Teacher Quality. All 4 of those are important venues. And my simple question is, so what have you learned? What have you learned from all of these things? And we'll get into some of them more specifically about trying to tackle the gaps and problems that we all know are there, whatever labels you put on them, success, achievement, opportunity, nonetheless, getting more kids to do better. What's the big picture lessons for you?
Yeah. Well, first, it's really nice to be here, and it's been fun when Alan got back in touch with me. When I was here last time, I had a 1-year-old, and now she's a freshman in high school at Denver Public Schools. So it's a little bit of there's been a lot of time, and in some ways, the more things change, the more they stay the same in a lot of ways, as you all were just talking about. But I think to start off and think about what have we learned and what have we seen, I think a lot of what Robert was talking about and what you were talking about is something that I've seen both in the policy work. I've had the opportunity and the privilege of being in the policy space and then in the practice space and then in the policy space and then in the practice space. So kind of trying to do the work on the ground, then going back and trying to work on it from a policy angle. And I think both matter. I think a lot of times we really fall down on translating the policy into the implementation and the practice. I think we put a lot of energy, whether it's at the state level or the district level, of like getting the policy passed and the political pieces of that, and then everybody breathes a sigh of relief and sort of assumes, and a lot of this is what you all were just talking about, that like things will just translate in the classroom level, and that principals and even superintendents and central office staff will know what to do with the policy. And the implementation work, both at the district level, at the school level, at the classroom level, is tremendously hard. I made the choice to go from Education Trust to then become a leader in the Denver Public Schools at the central office, leading a lot of our work around teacher and leader talent and pipelines. And I remember once saying to my superintendent, I made this switch, because I wanted to try to do the hard work of like putting all this policy in place. And I said, be careful what you wish for, because it's really hard work to get that. So, I mean, I think that is one huge challenge. I can talk a little bit about where I think we actually did some things really well in Denver around that.
Please do.
But, I think also just another thing, and then I'll talk a little bit because I think this was a huge thing we learned in Denver too, is so often, districts, states are pushing things down to the classroom in this sort of one-off piecemeal fashion. Like, here's the new policy on science of reading. Here's the new policy on social emotional learning. Here's the new policy on culturally responsive education, and not doing, and then leaving it to the teachers or sometimes the principals to do all the sense-making around how does this all fit together. And I've seen that in my own kids' schools where Denver, a couple of years ago, coming out of the pandemic, said everybody needs to do 15 minutes of social emotional learning, curriculum during the school day. I was in the district leadership meetings where that decision was made, so I understood the why behind it, right? It was an incredibly difficult time as kids were coming back to school after being out of school for so long. But then what I saw show up in my daughter's school schedule was like regular school, 15-minute social emotional learning block. It's like, I don't know what they're doing with that time, but it's just like that was not the intent. The translation was like, how do you weave in this work throughout? But because nobody had said, like, this is what it could look like to build this into the things that you're already trying to do instead of just add this thing on and tack it on to the end of the day. I think that's a huge challenge that, we're building and piling on schools and especially teachers to do that sense making that really needs to happen when policies are passed or at the district level.
Which often means, I assume, that they don't change because the classroom door closes and the teacher does whatever the teacher's going to do, I
mean, I think sometimes, I think, so I think to talk about a couple of the things that we did in Denver that I think were really exciting and really worked, and I think are hopefully give a sense of hope for what this work could be, is I do think that we worked really hard. And so this was, I came to Denver in 2014 and I worked for the district through 2022. And obviously I'm a public school parent, I continue to be very involved and invested in what's happening in the district. And I think we really did, through the policies, learn a lot of lessons about the importance of making anything you're trying to do around human capital and recruiting and retaining and developing teachers and leaders connected to instruction. We did not learn that early on, and we were very focused on, we in Denver really reimagined how our schools were structured and designed these teacher leadership models at scale, where we had teachers who were truly leading teams of other teachers, and were part of the school leadership team and being part of designing the strategic kind of direction of the school. It was really cool stuff, and it's still in a lot of ways in place in Denver. It's probably gotten watered down a little bit in more recent years, but one of the things when we started out on that work, we were so focused on like the teacher roles and the adult pieces and all this stuff, and we weren't connecting it at all to instruction and thinking about why are we even doing this? And we were doing it so that teachers could get better feedback from other teachers and that we were adding capacity so the principal wasn't trying to, coach and give feedback to 45 teachers. They were giving feedback to teacher leaders who then were giving feedback to teachers in the classroom. And so once we really drew that coherence between like this is about instruction, it became a much more meaningful effort. And so back to your point about like teachers closing the doors, there were a lot of things during that era. This was also when everywhere around the country, Colorado, Wisconsin, everywhere was rolling out a lot of things around teacher evaluation. And again, a lot of people were so fixated on like, well, what percentage of their score is going to be, student outcomes, and how will we assess student outcomes for those who aren't in tested subjects, and all these like very, like kind of micro conversations about these things. But what I would still say today is that even though a lot of that stuff wound up not being that important and kind of fell away, honestly, for a lot of reasons, I do think like the work that we did fundamentally changed the conversations that were happening in buildings about instruction. So if you even take away all the other stuff, I think that like principals and teachers to this day in Denver are probably talking more about like what instruction looks like in the classroom than they were before. And so to me, that is a win, even though there's still a long way to go.
I mean, there are a whole set of initiatives in Denver under the superintendent you worked for, Tom Boasberg. What was it called? ProComp?
ProComp, yeah, was our big compensation.
Which was something that was agreed to with the teachers union, which was a nationally noted, nationally prominent innovation, changing, as you said, evaluations, encouraging teachers financially to work in high-need schools, giving them incentives, and in general, just changing all the dynamics. I mean, Boasberg was very big into kind of a unified community approach and bringing people together. On the other hand, a lot of it didn't work. And to be a little bit on the over snarky side, he burned out enough that he not only left that job, he left the country. He's now running a large school in Singapore, I happen to know. What didn't work?
I think that some of it, and this is right, I mean, we all know this, like some of it is just, sometimes coalitions and politics can change a lot of things. And
Is politics involved? Oh, goodness.
And so I know I had somebody the other day say something to me, that somebody who does not work in education, and they said, well, education isn't really a political issue. And I was like, and so I think, I mean, some of that is definitely at play, school board elections and changes and new leadership. And I think it's been a huge learning for those of us who were in the work and who were doing a lot of that work and who were really excited about it, to recognize like it's all fragile, and I will say though, that's why I try to focus on like, okay, so a lot of the things we were doing around, teacher evaluation, for example, and trying to get better at differentiating how teachers are doing and also like what supports teachers need. Like a lot of that has sort of regressed and back to where it was before we started that work. But again, I do try to focus on but I do think a longer term outcome of that, and I know this because of my work in my own daughter's schools and still being involved in the district, like people are talking about instruction differently than they used to. And so I do think that was a lasting impact. I think that we have, some of Tom Boasberg, I mean, partly why he left was because he felt like the work, he was very, very, I mean, he believed there was no more important work to be done than investing in teachers and leaders. And he thought that the people in the buildings, and that's why I went to work for him, that's why I agreed with him, that like that was the key to the change. I think, and this gets back to the previous conversation, I think that under Tom, we then underattended to the importance of high quality instructional materials, because I think there was a little bit of a philosophy that he had that if you just get the right people in the roles, like the rest will just happen. And I think that then his successor, Susanna Cordova, who was only there for a few years, but
Also got eaten alive.
yeah, but that was more to do with some of the political changes. But yeah, she then kind of coupled what Tom had been trying to do around talent with a bigger focus on high quality instructional materials, and the district rolled out a huge initiative around training teachers around the science of reading was like a huge focus there, and so I think that was something. Now I say all this, like Denver's data does not look right now much better. I mean, we look a little better than some places, but we are not, like, there's still a lot of issues, right? Like Denver is pretty stagnant, like maybe slightly increasing, but we have very wide gaps that are growing, not shrinking. And you know, so even with some of these positives, like there's still a lot of issues and a lot of work to do.
So what would change that? What would improve that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I do think like continued. Well, I think a couple of things. I mean, I do think what Robert was saying and what you were saying around making teachers more comfortable with like using with high quality instructional materials and making that more standardized across the district. I think we have come a long way in Denver around the reading materials, and I think people are hopeful that that will start to show up in the data as like as the kids who have like started in kindergarten using more, and it's not scripted curricula in Denver by any means, but it is more of a expectation that you are teaching from a certain set of materials, and we've trained teachers on how to use those materials really well. Like, so I think people are hoping we'll start to see that bear out in the data in the coming years. But there's a lot of other subjects for which it's a little bit of like, it's still whatever the teacher is wanting to do, or there might be a district curricula, but the schools are not really utilizing it. So I do think that's one thing. I think another huge opportunity, which is a huge area of focus for us at the National Council on Teacher Quality, but was something that I became, kind of a disciple of while I was in the district, is that we need to stop putting all of the onus of training teachers on districts, and we need to ensure that we're holding our teacher prep programs to really high expectations for what teachers should be coming into the classrooms with. I mean, as you all were talking about, like teaching has become a much more complicated role, and there's a lot of things that we're asking teachers to do, and I totally agree that like there's a lot of things that we need to think about how we are able to let schools and teachers get back to their core job of instructing students and provide supports to kids and families in other ways. But I think the opportunity to better connect what teachers are learning in teacher preparation, including things like exposing them to curricular materials while they're in their prep programs, so then they know how to use those materials when they get into schools and aren't being asked to invent a lesson plan. I tell a story about when my daughter was in 3rd grade, they actually had a really great curriculum that they were using for reading and language arts in her classroom. And they were kind of going through this curriculum, and then one day she came home and I asked her what she was doing, and it was like this totally different and separate unit than anything they'd been doing on, I don't know, economics or something like that. And I said, well, what's happening? And she said, oh, well, our student teacher is teaching her like practice lessons. And so it was like the student teacher who had been in the classroom for the 12 weeks or whatever prior, but it was time for her to deliver and to practice taking on the classroom of her own. And so she brought in a completely different, because that's what she was told to do by her teacher prep program. And so instead of saying like, let's have you practice continuing this continuity of like the content, and so then that's like what she I'm sure went off and did in her own classroom because that was how she had been taught like good teaching looked like. And so I just think there's an opportunity to change that.
So we're transitioning, which is what I wanted to do at this point, to the work of of the National Council on Teacher Quality. How's it going? And what's the state more broadly of the pipeline, as it's called, for bringing people into the teaching world?
Yeah, I mean, I think we try hard at the National Council on Teacher Quality to find, to both like call attention to things that need to change and also to find bright spots. And I would say like there are bright spots in every facet of the work. And so I think when you're talking about the teacher pipeline more broadly, you know, there's been a huge narrative over the last couple of years around teacher shortages and concerns about who, you know, the fewer people entering the profession overall. And what we have seen as we have really looked at the data and worked with states to look at their data is that is true. It is not like there are fewer people going into teacher prep, and there are real pockets and areas of concerning shortages, particularly around higher need schools, geographic regions, especially rural areas, and then certain subject areas, especially like special education or English language learner teachers. But one thing we have really worked to caution against is that we think there's a big risk to sort of paint this with a broad brush and say like, you know, the sky is falling, like there's not enough teachers, because there's also some schools that have dozens of applicants for every role they post. And there are some, you know, areas or even within one school, they might get a ton of elementary applicants and 0 applicants for special education. And so when we think about how you attack that, a starting point is just even looking at the data. And one of the things we've found is that a lot of states don't even have the right workforce data. They aren't collecting the right data to even be able to look at and understand the differences. And so then they're sort of painting it with a really broad brush when you could be doing much more targeted systems. So I think that's one thing about the pipeline. A couple of others, I think, you know, I'd say also like there's a big narrative about teacher turnover and teachers leaving the profession. And again, like that is true. There are in some areas and in some schools, they are seeing upticks in retention, particularly in schools serving a higher need population. But interestingly, there was a survey a couple of months ago. Colorado every year does I think it's called the Teaching and Learning Survey or something that they give to statewide to teachers. And they actually saw a pretty dramatic downturn in the number of teachers who said that they were going to leave, like a 9-point drop of teachers who were considering leaving within the next year. So that would suggest that actually it's kind of stabilizing or even improving. So I just think there's a lot of variation. And I just caution people to like, you know, look at everything. I think you have to look at like, what does the data tell you about why people are leaving and where people are leaving from, and how do you address that versus try to do it all over. 2 other things I would say. One, in the last 5 years, like there's been a proliferation of alternate route to teaching programs, which essentially mean anything that is not sort of like a more traditional like teacher prep, like 4-year undergraduate program. And as we've dug into that, there's just tremendous variation in what those programs look like. And to be fair, there's tremendous variation in the quality of like traditional teacher prep as well. But I think when you look at the alternate route programs, especially in certain states, I don't actually know the data on Wisconsin, but Texas is one of these states where nearly 50% of their teachers are coming in through alternate route programs. And many of the programs in that state put teachers into the classroom on emergency licenses with no preparation whatsoever. And so we think that that's like a very concerning trend that people need to pay attention to, and then that there's both like policy and practice things that need to be addressed there. And then the last thing I would say about the state of the teacher pipeline, and it's a really interesting time to be talking about this, but you know, one area where over the last 5 or 10 years there's been actually some pretty positive progress is around diversity of the workforce. And a lot of districts, particularly urban districts, have invested real energy into diversifying their workforce, which is an evidence-based way to raise student achievement. That there is evidence that that having a teacher of color is good. It's particularly good for kids of color, but it's good for all kids. Like all kids benefit in classrooms with teachers of color. And so we've seen some progress on that. Of course, like, you know, what is happening at the national political context, particularly around like teacher prep programs, being able to be proactive about attracting people into the profession, you know, could really change that. But that has been one thing that has, I think, been a positive in the last couple of years.
As Robert was saying before, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. That's certainly showed up in the recent NAEP data. In Wisconsin, it's showed up in the state testing. The gaps are bigger. The higher end kids, so to speak, are doing pretty well and have stabilized post-COVID, and the higher needs kids are probably doing worse than ever and certainly not doing better. Mm-hmm. What could try to right that ship? Okay, we're out of time now.
Your question. Your questions
That's a really easy question to ask.
Are so easy. I mean, I think, you know, I think, and again, it's like I'm a little bit of a broken record, but I do think, I mean, disproportionate schools that serve higher need kids are disproportionately staffed by younger, more novice teachers, and sometimes with teachers that are coming in on emergency certificates and haven't had the kind of training that you'd want. And so I do think like it does go back to how do we ensure that our teachers are as ready as they need to be on day one, meaning like how are you partnering? And again, I think this is something that we worked really hard to do in Denver, and so I think like it can happen. Like we really, a couple of years in, looked at the fact that it was like, why are we having to kind of do a lot of like remediation of sorts with our teachers, of saying like, no, this is actually how you teach reading. This is how you build a classroom culture. And how do we actually say to our prep programs, like, you're in our city, most of your graduates come to teach in our schools. Like, can we just talk about how this can be a better partnership? And to their credit, like, because I actually thought, I remember sitting with Tom Boasberg and talking about doing this, and he was pretty optimistic about it. And I said, I think they're all just going to take their student teachers to other districts, like some of the metro area districts that are not sort of making these demands on them. We said we want to we want to decide which teachers are mentors and not like of student teachers, and not have you kind of, you know, use the people that you've always used, because we might not think that those are our best teachers, and we want them. And we want to decide what schools they're going into, and we want to place them in our high need schools that are also our high capacity schools with strong leaders, because we want them to have that experience of being in a high need school, because previously a lot of our newer teachers were doing their student teaching in some of our more affluent schools, but then they were getting jobs in our higher need schools, and they were not ready. And so I, like I said, I sort of thought they're all just going to say this is like too much work and they're going to go somewhere else, but they didn't. They said that okay, and they would send us their lists of student teachers, and we would match them up with mentor teachers, and we would actually go in to and like do some of the courses. Like we would go in, I mean, not me personally, but like some of the people on my team, and like introduce teachers to our reading curriculum, for example, and some of the other things that we were doing. And so I think that was like a place that we started to make some progress. Now, has it been sustained? And are like not necessarily. And I think that's just a really hard reality of how do you then let these things take root long enough to actually see the kind of impact that then would make a difference for kids? And I'm not sure that we have yet.
So, in a 1-minute summary, is there hope when it comes to the teacher pipeline, to making the job doable, to making a job that people would hold on to and keep and get satisfaction from?
Yes.
Okay,
I
thank
feel
you.
like I've done this a long time, so I have to be hopeful about it. And I do. I think that because again, like at NCTQ, we look around, we're always looking across the whole country, and we're lifting up, like there are there's really interesting work, and some of it is yielding student results. I think the hardest thing, and it's hard because like, you know, if you're in a political position and you're trying to get reelected or you're trying that, you know, there's a lot of pressures. But I think like we just, in so many things, we don't stay the course and we give up on things and we move away from things before we have a chance to see if they've worked or not. And so I think if there was like a willingness to stay the course on some things, and I hope that reading might be one of them, right? I think that's like, and I know that was some of what was discussed in the articles, is like that, you know, like I think there is an opportunity, but I also think the biggest thing that districts and states and others could do to support that is to be more coherent in how we're creating and rolling out policies, how we're supporting teachers, how we're making the sense so that when it gets down to the classroom level, they don't have to. And I think if we could do that, yes, I think that would make the job of teaching one that people would persist in and feel successful in. And I think if people are feeling successful in it, that will also help the great people to stay. I mean, that's true for all of us in all of our jobs.
We are going to take a 15-minute break, and we will resume promptly at 2. Great thanks to Sarah for coming from Denver here and for offering valuable thoughts. Part 3 of our program here, and I'm very appreciative to our first 2 speakers, to Robert Pondiscio and Sarah Almy, for coming in and bringing us some national class wisdom. So now we're going to the local-oriented wisdom, and I really do think we have 4 very wise and good people who are going to be speaking here. I will briefly introduce them. As you're facing there on the right is Professor Cynthia Ellwood of the Marquette College of Education. Also previously was a high-ranking Milwaukee Public Schools administrator, and before that, principal. And she will be the moderator and participant because she's a very multi-talented person. And to her right immediately is Kanika Burks, is the, let me get the title correct, Chief Schools Officer for Howard Fuller Collegiate Academy, was previously a principal for Milwaukee College Prep, was previously a principal for Milwaukee Public Schools. And next up, moving to the right here, is Maggy Olson, is these days the Director of Equity and Instruction at Greendale Schools, and is a particularly passionate advocate that I've known for a long time and admire. And she was previously also a principal for Milwaukee College Prep and Milwaukee Public Schools. And then you know, like 2 weeks ago, this was sort of a last-minute addition, but I really am pleased by this. Quentin Claiborne, who I think is in the room, at least yes, there he is. He posted on what I still call Twitter a sound segment from an Oshkosh school board meeting of teachers talking about the reading curriculum being used in Oshkosh. And I watched this and said, I want to talk to this woman. I want her to be part of this program. And that is Taylor Thompson, who is a first-year teacher from Oshkosh. Thank you to the Oshkosh school officials who are represented here, who gave a green light to her coming down and being part of this program. I think the teacher voice, and especially a first-year teacher voice, is really something we needed in the program, and Taylor's going to provide it. So thank you very much to all 4 of you. Take it away, Cynthia.
This is an unorthodox structure. At the very last minute, I was asked to add to the presenter role and be a moderator. But this is a conversation among all of us. So that's really a role we're all sharing together. So Ladies, the first question I want to pose has kind of been an assumption around which this whole conversation has been based, and that is on the incredible demands of teaching, the suggestion that teaching, as it now stands, is not doable. And I'd like to hear your reactions.
Do you want to go first?
Sure, I can start. It's not an impossible task. It's really not. It's demanding. It's hard. Each day is not rainbows and singing and dancing. It's hard. It can be impossible, but it's not if you are a collaborative person and you work with your peers and you have a community of a school and coworkers and principals who don't allow you to silo into your own rooms and do your own thing. Like I said, if you have those collaborative practices and you're confident and you have, and I even brought curriculum here because I want to show it off, if you have these things and you're able to use your teacher craft, it's not impossible. And if you build what I like to call a classroom family, it's not impossible, and it can be a very, very empowering job.
I love that you said that, Taylor, because I think so often in education that is the narrative. It's impossible, it's teachers are failing, kids are failing, our schools are failing, it's a mess. I want to say that is absolutely false. That is not true. Our schools are not failing, they're doing more than they've ever done before. And thanks, Joy. But they're doing more than they've ever been asked before. And I think our teachers deserve better. And they deserve advocates. And our teachers and kids deserve policymakers, administrators who have their back and who will get them the curriculum they need, who will get them the training they need. Teacher prep programs prepare them for what they deserve. And I think it is far from impossible. I was a 5-star principal for 5 years on 38th and Center, which is one of the most impoverished neighborhoods in Milwaukee. And we did it because and it wasn't impossible. And now I'm in a suburb and we haven't had 5-star 5 elementaries ever. And now we do. And you can do it when you actually put the faith in your teachers that they will change, that they will do the work, and that we believe in all kids with the tools when they're there. So I so appreciate you as a first-year teacher saying, like, it's not impossible, because it's a gift to be an educator.
It absolutely is a gift to be an educator. And as I sit here and think about the question that you asked, both of you brought up very important things, making sure that you have the tools to be successful, making sure that you have a belief in the people who are in front of the children, but also as an administrator, making sure that you are paying attention to the heart of the people that are in front of you. Educating young people, educating anyone is a complex job. It is a passion that has to come from deep inside because it does take a lot of work. However, if the person that is in front of our young people is not healthy, if their heart is breaking, if they are breaking down, they are not going to be the most effective person, regardless of the curriculum and the faith in them. So also think about, earlier we talked about the whole child, or SEL. Let's make sure we're thinking about the whole adult and making sure that we are preparing them and filling them with what they need to be an amazing educator like Taylor.
First year.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it is really demanding. It really is, but that in many ways is the excitement of it, you know? And you get to be around kids who, frankly, kids jazz you up. They do. And my own experience is that the more diverse the school, the more electric the energy. And so it is a job that is deeply meaningful as well as incredibly demanding. So with that said, let's tackle this question of curriculum. Taylor, and we don't have to keep going down the line, by the way, just engage, right? But I'm going to start with you, Taylor, because you did recently give a speech about your your community's literacy curriculum. You were part of a
Yes.
pilot as
Yep.
a first-year teacher. So go ahead and tell us
Yeah, so
what that experience was.
This year at the Asheville Area School District, we have been piloting CKLA, which stands for Core Knowledge Language Arts. Lakeside Elementary K through 5 is all piloting, and then a few other grade levels at other schools are also piloting. I could go on and on about how much I love it, but it takes students outside of Wisconsin, out of Milwaukee, out of our state, out of our country. I was looking at one of the units at the beginning of the year thinking, how am I going to get my fourth graders to want to learn about the Islamic Empire in the Middle Ages? And oh my goodness, are we going to get any backlash because we are talking about what they believed in the church? But it's so much more beyond that. It's taking those ideas and it's learning about history while sprinkling in all of the literacy things that students need to learn about. And I mean, we learned about polio, the Middle Ages, poetry, geology. And I see so much growth in my students, and I'm like, okay, now let's write about these mountains. And then they're adding dialogue and using personification to turn this mountain into a character. And they're taking ownership of it. But the thing and that's at a student standpoint, if I'm seeing that they love it, as a teacher, as a first-year teacher, I mean, here is a one unit book here, and I appreciate the comments before about vocabulary because it's so vocabulary heavy, and I've been seeing that connection of, I mean, we have a vocab word in here that has 3 different definitions, and we go through those definitions and we say, how can we use it in a sentence? How can we draw it in a picture? But it doesn't tell us to do that, right? It gives you, here are our 10 vocabulary words for this lesson. And then we're able to I sit down with my teaching partner every day and we look at, here are these vocab words, here are the questions. How are we going to get our students to comprehend this? How are we going to connect it to not only the lesson, but their life outside of school? And so we come up with ideas of making charts in our book. How can we get them up and moving and using our bodies to represent different things? It really gives teachers the ability to use their craft and to use, like you said, our gift in our classrooms, and we're able to do that by creating that classroom family and that environment to be able to be comfortable to do those fun things. So, but taking this curriculum and flipping through it, it doesn't stop there. It starts there. We look at it and we figure out how are we going to teach it. We're not spending that time, and I said this in the board meeting, we're not spending our time thinking about what in the world am I going to teach for this 45-minute block before they have recess. How am I going to teach them literacy? Well, here it is. But now we get to talk about how are we going to do it? How are we going to make it engaging? How are we going to reach where they are at? How are we going to differentiate for our lowest readers up to our highest readers with this one thing? And it gives us that power to do that, and it gives us that power to change our students' lives beyond Oshkosh too.
So really, what I hear you saying is that in this case, the balance, you really did find the balance between a curriculum that's developed so that you don't have to construct it, but still has room for you to exercise your passions and your creativity and responding to students, right?
And it's extremely important, and we talked about before, and I think it was in Robert's remarks too, about how lesson plans take forever and ever and ever. And I've talked to my teaching partner about this too, and she's talked about how the change in how she lesson plans is different. We lesson plan together, and we dump our links and our ideas into our spreadsheet for the week, and then each day during our prep, we look at it and we say, how are we going to do this, rather than what are we going to do?
Well, and I think that's what, when you're looking at high quality instructional materials, it isn't a scripted program, isn't that? Like that would rate really low on Ed Reports. Ed Reports, if you don't know, they have like a green, yellow, red rating for different curriculums. And it couldn't be green if it was a scripted program, because you have to be able to allow teachers to make those teacher moves. There has to be opportunity for differentiation. And there has to be opportunity to infuse SEL, and this is where I don't agree with Robert, is that I think SEL is wildly important because our kids, if they're not regulated, they are not going to learn. And I also feel like culturally responsive teaching also needs to happen within our classrooms through the curriculum. Our kids can learn about like, what's this one about? Is this the Muslim?
Geology.
Geology. So we're learning about geology, right? There's ways to make that culturally relevant for kids and bring in their life experience. And what rocks are in your neighborhood? That's culturally relevant. What are the things that you're seeing? That's really important. So it can exist while you are still having that high bar of rigor and having those expectations that they are going to need geology, like they're going to learn this background knowledge on top of the reading standards they need. I think that's really important to name.
Something that was stated was the amount of time that you spend with your co-teacher planning. Planning that professional responsibility, that you're not just picking up that and getting in front of the students and saying, today we are going to, without going through your lesson plan. So that oftentimes it does happen where teachers are not planning and where they're not preparing. However, it's important to make sure that teachers are professionals. And unfortunately, there are those that feel like teaching is not important. We would not be here if it was not for a teacher. However, we also have to empower you and empower those around us to know that there is some professional responsibility in our practice and making sure you are looking at the curriculum, making sure you are noticing, you know what, there is a gap in here. And I do know what the standards are, and I also know what my students need, and that does take some time. And without that piece, that curriculum is not going to do what it needs to for our children.
So I think striking this balance is not perfectly straightforward. It's not just a matter of going out there and finding the perfect material. And I've had the opportunity with my colleague Sharon Chubbuck to study a school that we call Oakmont High School. The school is about 30% Black, 45% white, 10% Latino, 3% Asian. And they undertook a massive effort to address issues of disparity of opportunity and outcomes in their school. And it began with a speech by the superintendent, brand new superintendent addressing the entire faculty for the first time, along with staff. And he said he just loved the rich diversity in the hallways, the dynamism, that energy that I talked about. And when the bell rang, kids went into classes, and he could look in the door of each classroom, and by the color of the skin, he knew what the track or curricular level of that class was. And he said to his faculty, "This is racism. This is institutionalized racism. We are doing this. We are responsible for this, and it's going to stop." And one of the things, and then we had the opportunity to study this process in motion. We studied an 11-year period, part of it historically. And I'm just thinking of a lesson that I saw where these were humanities pairs. This was in a D-track freshman year. So 90% of the freshmen that came in were suddenly put in the same honors level classes. And teachers really had to do a lot of the figuring out, And what I saw this teacher do, they were starting the industrialization unit. And what he did is this is a social studies teacher. He has an English partner that's co-teaching a group of about 47 kids. And he had kids look at the photography of Lewis Hine sort of a muckraking photographer in 1900 who was, trying to draw people's attention to child labor. So these were pictures of child laborers. And he had them first identify 3 pictures and sort of look at what they see going on in those photos. Choose one and write an analytic summary of what they see there, and also a fictive piece, such as a diary from the standpoint of a child that in that photo, a sonnet, whatever, their own fictional imagination. And what we saw there was really significant learning, and it was learning that this teacher had constructed on his own, right? They had a system where the assessments decided what students would learn, and they really took the assessments seriously and modeled them after AP standards. But it was he and his partner who were doing this together. Previous to that class, my partner and I sat in on the group of students that are a subset of that class who had a supplementary reading class. So these are the kids that were at the sort of bottom level by test score of this D-tracked freshman course. And what that teacher did, the English teacher did, was she somehow taught students about inferencing by using Super Bowl ads, where so how Super Bowl ads have you thinking one thing and then there's some kind of twist. And then she taught them about how to talk about and think about inferences. So looking at a photograph and be able to say, I would predict, or the evidence suggests, or we want to know further about. And then those kids walked into that first class of the industrialization unit, and every single one of them, of these so-called low-level kids, was engaged. Right? And I went up to one of them, we queried several of them privately and asked, what are you learning and what does it mean to you? And one kid who'd been in the reading class said, I want to know where are the people that are supposed to be doing these kids' jobs? And he said it with real emotion, and you saw a level of investment. So here this is an example of curriculum, teacher developed curriculum that really works, that reflects the passions of that teacher. And at the same time, I'm very convinced by Mr. Pondiscio's argument that not every person, not every teacher is equipped to create that kind of curriculum. So I just find it, it's a puzzle. I want to hear your comments overall. Any other thoughts about how you strike that balance?
Well, I think that's a rarity, that teacher. And I think that is what we think of when we think of that we all stand on the desk and and we're all like the stand and deliver moments, right? The calculate, all we think of those moments and but there's a reason there's movies named after those people. That's rare. So I'm thinking about what research says, because I'm a research nerd and think that's what we need to make decisions on for kids. So when we're looking at research, kids will rise to the occasion that they are the expectation. That is what research says. That is true about Black kids. That is true about poor kids. That is true about kids with IEPs. That is true about kids who are born in families that don't speak English. That is just what the research says. So when they detract that classroom, all 90% of all those kids in that room, you said, here's the bar. And I'm telling you right now, they met it higher than they would have if they would have went to a different class. Mm-hmm. And that is why when you look at a high quality material, it sets the bar. It says, here's the bar. This is where we're looking at it. It is aligned to the state standards. And the state standards are rigorous. And if we can set kids up to that, this is what we're expecting of you, instead of saying, oh, I'm so sad you're homeless, and I'm so sad you're Black, and I'm so sad you have an IEP, and I'm so sad that you don't speak the language that we do in America all the time, and I'm so sad. And then you lower the rigor. They're gonna meet that, and you can celebrate all day. Mm-hmm. Great, I met that low bar. Awesome, let's have an ice cream social. Versus, here's the bar. I didn't meet it, but whoa, am I way higher than I would have been if you set that bar down there. I mean, I don't like to quote George Bush very often, but I'm going to. The soft bigotry of low expectations is so real in our country. And it is disgusting, and it is that racism that you talked about, Cynthia.
I kind of want to add on to what you were saying about, like, here's the bar, right, and you're meeting them there, and it struck something in my brain. And our professional development this year has been focused on rigor and engagement, and there is a engagement technique that really stuck out to me, and we call it the right is right. For an example, so if you ask a student, well, what's a bicycle? And they say, oh, one time I fell off my bicycle when I was riding it. And sometimes a teacher will say, oh, okay, that's great. And then they'll move on to somebody else, and then they'll answer the question. But that's setting the bar for that student, that I can answer something wrong, but you're also lowering that expectation. But we have to hold those students to high expectations. So if you ask that student, well, what's a bicycle? Oh, I fell off of one when I was riding it. Oh, well, you gave me an example. Can you give me a definition of what that bicycle is? Now you've empowered that student to answer it. And if they're like, well, I don't know. Okay, well, tell me about a bicycle. What do you know about a bicycle? And pushing them towards that definition rather than just letting them go off and give an example. You are holding them to that high standard, even if they didn't understand it at first. And then they'll say, oh, a bicycle, this is what a bicycle is. Great, you got it. You told me what a bicycle is. And then you can move on. It might take time, right? And we're on a time crunch. We've got things to do, and it's going to take time. But now you have just taught that student that I can do hard things. My teacher is not going to let me get away with just kind of sliding under the radar. You're holding them accountable, and that keeps that bar here, and it doesn't lower it. So,
Maggie, you said something about the type of teacher that Cynthia described as being rare. And as I'm sitting here today and thinking about what Mr. Pondiscio, I've been nervous to say your name, so this is why I looked at you, because I wanted
to keep on calling him Robert. You did it perfect.
I need to say it correctly. My first name is Kanika, and I will get you if you do not say it correctly. However, you talked about building the capacity in teachers and pouring into teachers and making sure that every teacher is able to say to a child, this is where the bar is. I am going to do all that I can to get you to that bar. I am going to get to know who you are, because yes, you may have fallen off of your bike on Sherman Boulevard while you were riding toward Washington Park. However, talk to me about that actual bike and tell me what is that bike, right? And so just by even adding a neighborhood, you are letting the student know, I see you beyond this definition or beyond this curriculum, beyond whatever you're asking me to do, that you see who I am. And earlier today, I just wrote down this African proverb, and many of you are familiar with it, but the child who is not embraced by the village will burn it down to feel its warmth. And there are places that the fire may not have spilled into the classroom yet, but it's sparked inside of the child, because you don't know my name. You don't know that I had a bike and someone stole it. You don't know all these things about me, but you want me to learn from you. And so that teacher that's rare, let's flip that and make that teacher the standard. Let's make that teacher the expectation by giving them the tools that they need to teach this and to add to it in a way that highlights all the young geniuses that are before us.
I want to just say that the rarity is being able to make up that curriculum that is pushing the kids. That's what I think is rare. I don't think, that's what I was speaking to.
Okay.
I think no teacher goes into education hating kids. I think they don't. You don't choose it. I think people get there sometimes. I actually literally was a principal. I'm like, I think you hate kids. And the teacher was like, I kind of do. I'm like, that's not okay. Like, we're going to have, like, you got to leave, or you gotta leave, or no, but
gotta
or change, like, or find the love again, because that can happen too. So I do think when I'm talking about that rare is like being able to write their own curriculum, be able to have those great outcomes. I think that is really rare. I do not think it is rare for us to have teachers who want the best for their kids. I just don't think they always have the tools, and they don't have the feedback they need. They don't have the people who are giving them observations. They don't have people who are, administrators. I was at a charter school, Milwaukee College Prep, and we had a saying like, kids don't fail, teachers fail. That's what Marva Collins used to say. And I would say, absolutely not, Marva. I disagree with you. God bless her soul. But I would say, kids don't fail, teachers don't fail, principals fail, because I'm the principal. So my job was to make sure that our teachers got everything they could so they could be rare for our kids, and not rare. But I'm just saying, when I was speaking to was like being able to, because at Milwaukee College Prep, we had all of our, I was a 5-star principal, we had curriculum that teachers used, that they weren't making that up. We were spending our time building relationships, to your point, Kanika, talking about SEL, making sure that they had that while also holding them to right is right, while doing those things. So we weren't wasting our time creating full lessons. We were focused on instructing the children in front of us. So I do want to just name that.
So thank you. And we'll go all the way back, since you referenced Mrs. Collins, right, to a time when there was not a curriculum, and we were given novels and had to create it. And so I think when you talk about her quote, and yes, it talks about teachers failing children, you leveled up and said administrators fail. I would level up even further to talk about the policies, because a policy cannot legislate what's in the heart of an educator. And there are all these policies out there that make teaching difficult. There are lots of policies out there, and whether they are from our government or from the local school, it just makes life very difficult. But being an administrator who's willing to push through the norm and say, like, everything is not black and white. There's some gray in there. And we have a variable in that those are the children that are before us. So breaking down policies, standing up, saying the hard things so that our children get what they need and they don't burn us down, because they're doing this right now. And they deserve us to do all those great things.
I would argue that in addition to policies, there are beliefs and longstanding practices that are great, play a great role in the inequality that we see now. I want to read briefly from one of my students' reflective papers. She was reacting to Anne Arnett Ferguson's Bad Boys, the Making of Black Males in American Public Schools. She's responding as a Black mother. I've witnessed many moments when young boys of color were unfairly judged based on their skin tone or perceived background. As a parent, I anticipated the challenges my son would face in the classroom. With the right teacher, his education would be an uphill battle. At times without the right teacher, his education would be an uphill battle. At times, he was treated as less simply because of his skin color. Fortunately, I was able to advocate for him. Over time, I taught him to advocate for himself, a process that required immense effort. Sometimes I had to prove his worth, not just his mother, but as an educator. Sadly, many young boys of color lack this type of support, not because their parents don't care, but because they may not know how to properly advocate for their children without being perceived as aggressive or uncooperative. Whenever I approached my children's teachers, especially my sons, I noticed a shift. Once they realized I was an educator, their attitudes changed. Their approach to teaching my son and their perspective on his, sorry to say it, learning style shifted. However, I recognize this isn't the case for many parents. Some struggle with communication barriers. Others have negative experiences. Many don't have time due to demanding work schedules. This disparity isn't their fault. Most parents do the best they can, yet many find it difficult to balance advocacy, work, and family responsibilities. I took full advantage of teaching at or near my children's schools, But that is unfair to put parents from different circumstances in that situation. I've come to understand that American public education does not just serve young boys of color well, simply does not serve young boys of color well. Realistically, not all of them receive the high quality learning they deserve. So let me ask you what we do about this, and you've been talking about leadership, and I'm particularly interested in what are the roles of school and district leaders in addressing the kind of inequalities that are built into people's attitudes, as well-meaning as they may be.
We are disruptors of the bad attitudes. We are the disruptors of, but this is how we've always done it. I am definitely a, I guess, district leader these days.
Yeah, you are.
The students are always at the heart of everything. You will respect yourself, you will respect the parents, the teachers, everybody gets this level of respect because we are all here for the right reason, and that's the children in front of us. It means having hard conversations. It means looking someone in the eye and say, like, did you really mean to say that? Are you really judging somebody based on what's on the outside of them? Do you know you just broke a school rule as an adult? So having hard conversations and being able to coach someone up, or unfortunately coach someone out, because you cannot be in front of children and hurt them. What this parent wrote, I did not want to be the first person to respond to you because of my own experience in education as a student being educated. And I was like, ooh, if I answer first as a Black woman to what you just read, like, am I fulfilling a stereotype, right? And so I immediately went like this and looked like I'm not answering first. However, I did.
So proud of you.
You looked at me.
I did. I was like, you got this.
But it is what this mother wrote is not something that's just happening today. It's happened. I am an educator because I did not have educators that looked like me. The teacher in high school, Dave Dettinger, was this amazing person that made me feel seen, valued, and heard, and let me know that my voice was not one of disrespect, that my voice was not one that people should be afraid of, but I had something to say. When I asked questions, I wasn't told that I was being inquisitive and that maybe you can be a researcher or all the things. Mm-hmm. It was, why are you asking me that question? You don't need to know that. Ma'am or sir, yes, I do need to know this. Dave Dettinger also taught me to love the skin that I'm in, regardless of what I looked like and where I came from, that I had every right to be in the seat that I was in as anybody else. And because of that experience, I am the administrator that will rock the boat. I will disrupt. I will advocate. I will stand even toe-to-toe. We call it rumbling with other chiefs in my organization and beyond to say, are we doing what's best for kids or are we doing what makes the adults comfortable? And if it's about, well, the adults are comfortable, they don't want to work that hard. Okay, they're educators. What's best for this child? And it takes strength and courage and knowing my purpose to be able to do that. And some days I cry, and other days I cry tears of joy because I can see that child, that somewhere inside of them is a little me, and look at them shining and holding their head up high because someone stood up for them and had a voice for them when they didn't know that they even had a voice.
Building off of that, and you asked, like, where does it start? I think it starts with, like, student first, but I also think it starts with being uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. There are norms that are out there that should not be, and that a lot of people just put off and put in the back of their mind, or they don't change. And I think it starts with, you need to be uncomfortable having those conversations, and it might be uncomfortable if somebody in your workplace would say, hey, that's not right. You said this, and it put that student in a position where they felt looked down upon instead of having them looked up upon in the growth that they can have. So it starts with being uncomfortable, and it starts with disrupting the things that you see. And we've talked about this specifically at my elementary school of Lakeside, of we are all in agreement of if we see somebody doing something out of maybe unintentionally or without the education or without the knowing of what I'm doing isn't okay, we have the respect for each other to call each other out on that. Of course, like in a respectful setting of saying, hey, like you said this is how that was perceived from that student. And now what can we do about it? How can we grow? How can we learn? So I think it starts with wanting the best for your students first, but I also think it starts with being uncomfortable, and you need to be willing to change.
Well, and I think from a district level, like there needs to be policies and procedures that support all kids, and really making sure that when we're saying all, like I always joke with my staff in Greendale, because we always talk about all means all, and I'm like, all means all is so easy in August. When you get your class list, you're like, yes. This is gonna be the best class ever, I got everyone. But in October, you're like, but not that one. And let me tell you, not that one either, because it gets harder. Because you start, there's personalities, there's things that are barriers, there's things that come up. So making sure that you have policies and procedures that set the tone that we are looking for all kids, and that we are being purposeful around equity and inclusion and diversity. And I am saying those words. Because each of those words matter for kids. And because diversity is a reality. That is where we live. If you look in this room, we have diversity of age, we have diversity of skin color, we have diversity of background. That makes us stronger. And honest, and the inclusion of making sure that we feel like a belonging and we're building community in this moment so matters. And then also the equity that we are sharing our voices and that we are sharing our experiences and we have access and opportunity, that is so important. So I think making sure that we can have schools and teachers that can hold each other accountable in those conversations, because we have policies that say, we don't stand by hate. We don't stand by, we have high expectations for all kids. We're not gonna allow you to look in a classroom and go, yep, that's clear the lower track, because we have all the kids who are EL in there, and we have all the kids that are Black and brown. Yep, or there's 7 different paras in there, so we definitely know that that's a co-taught classroom. Like, those are the things that from a district standpoint, we need to step up and do. And we have to stand up and say what is okay and what isn't. That's our job. And to support our principals when they have to have those hard conversations, I always tell, I'm gonna swear, I hope that's okay. I tell my staff that I'm the shit umbrella. I do. I say, I'm your shit umbrella. So as long as you are doing right by kids and you are following the procedures and policy, you're not gonna be on the news, I will. I got your back. And if they call belling and say all these horrible things, guess what? They are not gonna call you, they're gonna call me. And I will stand in front and I will be the problem. You are not the problem. And I think having an administrator that will stand up at the district level and say, this is what we're doing. If someone's trying to ban a book out of your classroom, they're banning my book, not yours. So making sure that at that district level, I have your back. Yes. Because that makes teaching impossible if you don't have someone having your back.
So we've got about 2.5 minutes.
Oh, sorry.
So let's give each person just an opportunity to close out. Go ahead. Whatever wasn't addressed or was addressed, go ahead and make a comment.
Oh, goodness.
Good luck.
Overall, and I can tie it back to the first question of, is teaching impossible? No. It can be, but with the right people, the right support, and just that overarching love of each and every one of your students. I like to tell my kids, and one of my kids will accidentally call me mom or something, and they'll be like, oh, sorry. And I'm like, nope, I'm not a mom, but I'm a school mom to 20 of my kids, and it's them first. Of course, I'm a wife and a daughter and a sister and all of the things, but those kids come first, even at night when I'm at home thinking about other things and whatever. Those kids come first. And this is going to put them in the right direction. Our attitudes and our beliefs are going to put them in the right direction, and being uncomfortable with change is going to put them in the right direction. And it really comes down to student first, and Oshkosh is doing student first. So
I'm going to answer the question that Alan asked Sarah earlier. Is there hope? Yes. There's so much hope in our children and our educators. And right now, we are in a very dark place. And I would argue that we are not in a tomb. We are in the womb, and we're ready to be reborn. So hope is here. Hope is in our children. Hope is in the work that we have moving forward. And I believe that with people in this room and the work that we need to do for children, we will continue to make excellent gains for our kids.
Our children are necessary. They deserve excellence. If we do anything less, we are not being responsible adults. They are the future. They are going to be the ones that no matter what street or alley or park we are in, we should be able to look them in their eyes and tell them that we love you, we see you, and we want what's best for you. Conversations like this change minds, and instead of making children feel a sense of hopelessness, we absolutely can make them feel hopeful and change their futures and just make things better overall in education.
Hard to top all that. It's an honor. It's an honor. I think Taylor used to call it a gift to be able to interact with children and to be part of this world. I don't think it boils down to a single approach to curriculum. I don't think it boils down to whether a teacher, an individual teacher, has racist beliefs or actions. I think we have to put first, and here's where I think I most overlap with the speakers this morning, must know that every single one of our students is capable of high intellectual thought, that they are capable of seeing themselves as administrators, as intellectuals. And what we're doing right now is not building pathways so that every child is offered this incredibly challenging curriculum and the appropriate supports that make it possible for them to succeed. Thank you. It's been an honor to talk to you today.
Yeah, you guys sound great.
Am I on here? I think so. Great thanks to Taylor, to Maggie, to Kanika, to Cynthia for a lot of really valuable thoughts and candid thoughts. One word in there I don't think I've heard in this room before. That's okay.
Umbrella.
Yeah, umbrella. We don't talk about umbrellas very often. No, this was great, and I greatly appreciate all of you being willing to take part in this and to share your thoughts so candidly and wisely. I'm going to call up Robert and Sarah to the table here for some questions and some wrap-up thoughts, I hope. How are we fixed for microphones?
So many thoughts. I know. We are, Mike.
Yeah, I think so. Is
This
it?
is that question.
I think mine is on.
Let me start with a couple of the questions that came in from people, and we do have a nice little packet of questions here. One addressed to Robert, but I would address it also to Sarah in response. I feel the greatest challenge of classroom teaching is managing the behavior of students, not planning curriculum.
Yeah.
How does your hypothesis address student behavior?
You got to leave more time for it. This is not a direct, but can I just share a thought about the panel that we just heard,
Sure.
which,
Yeah,
which gets to this? And I don't want to critique the law school for having planned this invigorating panel, but may I suggest it would have been better if there was another panel right now, and that panel was 3 or 4 teachers who left after a year or two, so we could hear from them about why they left. Because what you just heard was not any gainsaying anything that we've said. What you've just heard from the panel that was here was a proof point of how this can work when you've got HQIM, when you've got supportive staff, when you've got an administrator, and I love that phrase, shit umbrella. Okay? That's what this should look like. That's not gainsaying anything that we've said. That's a demonstration point. But now you need to hear what it looks like when those things are absent. Because this is the exception, that panel would be the rule. And part of that rule, Alan, is behavior. I was honored to testify in front of the Senate Help Committee last year about a bill from Bernie Sanders to raise minimum wage for teachers across the country to $60,000 a year. And my testimony in brief was, great, I want to pay teachers more, but if you think that's why teachers are leaving, let me tell you, it's the lack of support. It's behavior. That is literally the #1 reason why teachers leave, is they cannot manage their classrooms and they are not getting support from their administrators.
Your thoughts, Sarah?
I think 2 things. One, I think what the panel was talking about around engaged classrooms, engaged students, and this is not, there are certainly exceptions to this, but oftentimes engagement can solve a lot of behavior issues. If classrooms are well planned, well organized, well structured, if the curriculum and the content of what kids are doing is engaging, you will see fewer kids act out. Now, there are some behavior issues that need outside support, and that is why a lot of teachers then sometimes have a hard time persisting. But I think that is one thing, and I would again go back and tie it to how teachers are being prepared. NCTQ is actually undertaking some work to really look at and develop a framework around what would we hope teachers are getting as part of their preparation around building effective learning environments. And some of that is managing behavior, but also, right, creating culturally responsive classrooms and socially, emotionally supportive classrooms, because we think there's a lot that teachers could be walking in with things in their toolkits that right now they just don't have. And so then if you're a first-year teacher and you can't even get through your lesson because of all the disruptions, it makes it a lot harder to persist.
I'm selecting from the questions, obviously. One here is, what about student-teacher ratio? I mean, we know there are classes in Milwaukee where we've got way too many kids, 40 kids in an early grade classroom. Is it impossible to succeed? Is it more difficult? Is it solvable?
I have taught classes with as few as 16 students and as many as 34. I was really effective with 16. I was really not effective at 34. I'm not sure where the cutoff point is there, but there's a cutoff point and it'll probably be different for every single teacher. I'm not opposed to class size reduction at all, but I think a lot of us make assumptions about class size reductions, and go back to what I was saying earlier today about how we have 3.7 million teachers, and most of them are going to be, by definition, ordinary people, not saints and superstars. We'll raise that number to 4.5 million, just picking a number. Now you've got a lot more, at the lower end of that distribution curve. Who wants that teacher? Right? In other words, we all assume, I want my child to have a smaller class size, but we're also assuming my child's going to get the smallest class and the best teacher. That may not be true.
Yeah, and in fact, the research is pretty clear that an effective teacher is more powerful than a really small class size. So reducing reducing class size, but not making sure that all the teachers that are teaching are as effective as they could be is not as good of a way to advance student achievement and advance student outcomes than really, making sure you have effective teachers. This is a little bit hard one for me because I think in theory, right, I understand that. And then when you walk into a classroom or when you think about the difference between having 20 kids and having 40 kids and just the amount of work that goes with that, there's a lot that's a lot harder about having a big class size. That's where I think there's also opportunity for districts and schools to think really creatively. And we have examples of some of this in schools and districts that we've looked at NCTQ, where you have to like think creatively around how are you supporting. So you might have a teacher that has 40 students, but you also have other people, right? Like whether it's student teachers or paraprofessionals or other people who are pushing in to support on that, or teachers have like shared models where they're sharing some of the grading responsibilities or things like that, so that it's just making it a little bit more of a manageable thing. But that involves reimagining a little bit some of your school structures versus just the like one teacher, 40 students.
Here's one. Like many of the European systems, might a national curriculum be the answer? And I would add on to that, whatever became of the Common Core, which was sort of a step in that direction.
The Common Core are standards. Standards are not curriculum. Give me 2 hours sometime and I will tell you the difference.
I'll grant that.
Sure, national curriculum would be fantastic. There's just one little problem. It's that pesky little constitution that we have that says we can't have one. So I'm not going to waste anybody's time talking about it.
We can't have one as far as it being imposed.
Well, a voluntary one? Well, sure. I suppose you could. States could certainly have one. In fact, one point that was not made today that could be made about teacher preparation. I'm occasionally guilty of wild oversimplification, and so alert. Here's another one. Given that in most states the vast majority of teachers educated in the state teach in that state, I cannot admit of any reason why, and let me be clear, this is mostly for literacy, which is my thing, elementary education, literacy, where the foundation is built. I see no reason why a state cannot say, look, if you're going to teach in this state, this is the curriculum we use, K to 5, CKLA, Wit and Wisdom, et cetera. Hey, colleges of education, you must graduate your elementary candidates prepared to teach that curriculum because it's our curriculum in this state. Thank you. I never get that for this. My work is done here. And when they say, well, we are certified teachers, so you have to respect us, then you say, well, you certify teachers because we allow you to certify teachers. So if you want to continue to do that, they've got to be trained in this curriculum. That is the one policy idea that I would put forward as potentially powerful.
Again, selecting from, we got people who wrote both sides of the card in small letters.
That
too.
I do get a lot.
How do teachers get parents to show up? It seems without them, this doesn't work.
Well, it has to work without parents. It's better when you have parents, but we don't always have that luxury. Parents love their children. I'm not one of those. I'm embarrassed, frankly, when I think about some of the discussion I heard in my elementary school being completely dismissive of parents. And in fact, I'm not a teacher basher, but this is an attitude that I think we need to change in this work. We love to complain about how teachers are not trusted, but there's been polls in this, I think from EdChoice, when we ask teachers, who do you trust the most? My colleagues, my administrators, my union leader, et cetera, literally at the bottom of those polls, parents. That's not okay.
Yeah, I think that it's something I was thinking about in relation to like just a lot of the efforts, and I think there is something about building buy-in, but also making sure people understand the why of what you're doing. And I actually gave this feedback. I'm sure principals love when somebody who works in education as their career and offers them feedback. I try really hard to not do it, but I did give my daughter's school's principal a little bit of feedback that I said, they send out all this stuff and they're always talking about testing and things, but they never tell parents why the kids are taking the test. And I understand that, right? We have a graduation requirement in Colorado around a minimum score on the SAT. So they give kids a lot of cracks at the SAT to make sure that they meet that minimum score. But a lot of parents are like, why are they taking this test again? This is taking up so much time. So I think there is something around like, how do you make sure you help the parents understand the why? I think that's also true. I think we made a lot of mistakes and missteps in DPS when we were rolling things out, that we didn't build enough buy-in across the system from everybody, from principal supervisors all the way down. But I think that is one way that that you can, just like, and again, it's like honor that they want to help their kids, but you have to help them understand, why are you teaching reading this way? Why are you teaching math this way? Why are tests matter?
Let me give each of you a brief opportunity to summarize what we've said and done here today. If the whole subject is how to make teachers more successful in motivating and succeeding with their students. I'll ask Sarah to go first.
Oh, geez. I was hoping where we're going. Then I could just be like, ditto. I mean, I really appreciated the panel, and I really, I think, when you've been at this work a really long time, as so many of us have, it can be hard to see the hope and the path forward, and it can feel like, policy in particular is such a blunt tool, and then when you see how it plays out, it can be really frustrating. And yet I do think there are a number of places and a number of reasons to hope and think that, things can change. I think nothing can happen in a silo. I mean, I think that's one thing I would say, right? Curriculum matters, teachers matter, how you train teachers to use the curriculum matters, what prep programs are doing, and then how that's followed up and supported by districts and principals matters. And I think the more that as people are thinking about tackling the issues, it can be not in sort of this silo of we're just doing this or we're just doing this. You have to think about the whole picture. And one thing I would say related to that I talked about a lot at the district, and we talk about a lot at NCTQ, is kind of what Maggy and Kanika and some of the others were saying around the importance of equity, but rigor is equity. And so I think when you try to say well, now we're doing equity and we're focused on equity, that does kids a huge disservice. And so I think, again, just how are we connecting all of these pieces and bringing it together. And again, I think there are places that it sounds like some of the schools that were up here today, are doing it. And so how do you also look to them and learn from them rather than kind of let people throw up their hands and say it's all too hard, it's too much, it's impossible. It's not impossible.
I have pages of notes and I'm just trying to pick up a few. Thank you, Sarah. Just a few semi-disconnected thoughts. I'm not sure who mentioned it on the panel about wanting to be that superstar teacher who stands on the desk like John Keating in Dead Poets Society, whatever that movie was. Think of how we apply that lesson, by the way. How many of us became teachers because we wanted to be that teacher. But that's also the model, to bring this full circle, that we apply in policy. Oh, that's who the teachers are. Now we just need to hold John Keating accountable. This is the way we view teaching as policymakers. It's as if we're saying, well, look, Aaron Judge hit 54 home runs last year, so that proves it can be done. It can be done if you're Aaron Judge. Okay? It doesn't mean we can all hit 54 home runs. And yes, point well taken from the previous panel, teaching is immensely satisfying work when you are successful. So the goal is, how do we make more people feel successful at this? And that's my point about wanting to have that panel of unsuccessful teachers so we can learn the lessons of where we failed. Taylor, I'm thinking about, I had the professional privilege of working on the development of CKLA, the curriculum that she was lionizing here and she had in front of her. So it's gratifying to hear a teacher say, hey, this is great. But my question would be, what would Taylor's first year of teaching look like if she didn't have that, right? If she had what I had, a blank plan book on Sunday morning, right? And a staff developer telling me, Mr. Pondiscio, you're the best person to know what every child needs. Taylor would be telling a very, very different story here today. I think, Taylor, right? If
She's actually out of the room.
oh, she's, okay, I can't see her, I'm blocked. So the last thought is, I'm going to revise my thinking on something I've said a couple of times today, that look, we had 3.7 million teachers. They're going to be ordinary people, so therefore make the job doable by them. I like the note of optimism and hope in the last panel. We cannot find 3.7 million superstars, saints and superstars to be teachers, but we might be able to find 100,000 superstar principals and school leaders. That's a much more manageable number. So maybe the lesson for policymakers is not how do we hold teachers accountable, but how do we recruit, retain, and embarrass with riches those 100,000 people? Because then then it's a real conversation. You really might be able to get 100,000 of our best and brightest, cognitively elite, most driven, most talented people to say, you know what, maybe I'll leave the tech industry and I'll become a middle school principal. Because again, it's the most satisfying work. Okay, maybe not middle school, let's be real. You take my point. If I'm investing in talent and trying to really put the best talent in the highest leverage spots, 100,000 administrators feels a lot more doable to me than 4 million teachers.
For what is now approaching almost 20 years, Marquette Law School, and I really do have to point to the dean, Dean Kearney, as the one who enabled this, has wanted to be a crossroads for serious, substantial, level-headed discussion of important issues. I think that's exactly what we have done here today, with a focus on something as crucial as how do we get teachers to be more successful, and how do we get more students to be successful by doing that. And all of you are here because you are engaged in this. Many of you are experts at it because your track record says so. And I agree with Robert. I don't know about the failed teachers, but that might be a really interesting idea. But I agree with Robert. We need to continue the discussion. We need to continue to focus on these issues. And I'm hoping that this will be one of the venues where that happens. And I'm eager to stay in touch with all of you. Thank you all for being here. Thank you to Robert. Thank you to Sarah. Thank you to Maggy and Kanika and Cynthia and Taylor. And that's the end.